Move! Stop!
Stop what? I can't appreciate God's work now?
Girl, them breasts are about to bust right out them scrubs. You walking around here with all that hanging out? What you expect a man to do? He blocked the hallway, badge on his chest, gun on his hip, grin on his face like he was unwrapping a gift. I'm serious, you black women. I swear, y'all are just built different. That right there? He pointed at her chest with 2 fingers like he was aiming at a target. That ain't even legal, sweetheart. You need to file a permit for carrying all that. She told him to move.
He didn't. And don't even get me started on what's going on back there. Turn around. Come on, turn around for me. Lord, have mercy, girl. That thing is sitting like a shelf.
Where do y'all keep all that? Is that genetic? Because I have never in my life. He let out a whistle, low and long, the kind of sound a man makes at a car show. She said stop. He laughed. Stop what? I can't appreciate God's work now. He stepped behind her. His hand caught her waist and pulled her back half a step. His chest pressed against her shoulder blade. One hand came up to her chest and squeezed, slow, like he was testing the ripeness of fruit at a grocery store. The other hand slid down and grabbed her behind, full palm, fingers pressing in, holding it like he owned it. He said, like he was confirming something to himself. Everything they say about y'all is true. She couldn't move, her body locked, every muscle frozen. He held on for 3 seconds that lasted a lifetime. Then he let go, stepped back, and adjusted his belt so the holster caught the fluorescent light. Just a security check, sweetheart, he whispered. It's my job. He tapped his badge twice and walked away, boots echoing down the corridor. The security camera on the wall blinked red from an angle he had memorized 5 years ago. He knew exactly where to stand to disappear, but 12 feet above his head, a second camera, one he had never seen, was recording every frame, and the woman he had just put his hands on was the engineer who built it. If that made your blood boil, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe right now. That's not just a button, that's your voice saying this is not okay. We're Channel Name, and we tell the stories the system tried to bury. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so these voices never go quiet again. And wherever you are tonight, whatever you're carrying, I believe God's got his hand on you and everyone you love. But that man with the badge, he has no idea what's coming. To understand why, we need to go back. Naomi Cartwright, 34 years old, single mother, surveillance systems engineer at Meridian General Hospital, Atlanta, Georgia. Naomi Cartwright had a rule about Sundays. No matter what the week had done to her, no matter how many hours she had logged at Meridian General, no matter how many times Zuri had asked for chicken nuggets instead, Sunday evening meant oxtail stew. The real kind, the kind that took 4 hours and made the whole apartment smell like her grandmother's house on Piedmont Road. Back when Bankhead still had porches where people sat and talked until the streetlights came on, the Dutch oven was older than Naomi. Black cast iron, heavy enough to anchor a boat, seasoned with decades of oil and heat and patience. There was a crack in the lid, a thin line running from the handle to the rim, and every few months someone, usually her cousin Drea, would say, "Girl, just get a new one." Naomi never did. Her grandmother had cooked in this pot for 40 years, raised 3 daughters and 11 grandchildren on what came out of it. The crack didn't stop it from working. It just meant you had to pay attention. Zuri sat at the kitchen table with her legs swinging, a purple crayon in her right hand, drawing something that was either a horse or a very tall dog. She was 7, and she had opinions about everything. "Mama, how come the meat has bones in it? Because that's where the flavor lives, inside the bones." Zuri considered this.
That's weird. That's cooking, baby.
The kitchen was small. Galley style, barely room for 2 people to pass each other without turning sideways. But Naomi had made it hers. A magnetic strip on the wall held 3 knives she kept sharp. A picture of her grandmother, Estelle, was taped to the side of the refrigerator with a piece of masking tape that had been replaced so many times the spot underneath was a different shade of white. In the photo, Estelle was young, maybe 30, standing in front of Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church in a hat so wide it cast a shadow across her shoulders. Naomi stirred the stew. Thyme, allspice, garlic, Scotch bonnet pepper, and the browning sauce that she had to drive 20 minutes to the West Indian grocery on Buford Highway to find because the Kroger on Cascade never stocked it. The oxtails had been seared until they were almost black on the outside, and now they sat in the broth, surrendering slowly. The way her grandmother taught her. Low heat. No rushing. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it. A calendar reminder, shift start 10:45 p.m. Sunday nights at Meridian General Hospital were Naomi's regular rotation. She was a clinical surveillance systems engineer, which was a title that took people about 3 tries to understand. What it meant, in practice, was that she designed, installed, and maintained every camera, sensor, and monitoring system in a 7-story hospital that served over 400,000 patients a year. Every hallway camera, every ICU vital signs feed, every server rack in the basement that stored months of footage. If a camera went dark on the 3rd floor at 2 in the morning, Naomi was the one who got the call. If the ER's patient tracking system glitched during a trauma surge, Naomi fixed it before most people knew it was broken. She had been at Meridian for 6 years, long enough to know every blind spot in the building, long enough to know which elevators had cameras that actually worked, and which ones had been pending maintenance since before the pandemic. Long enough to know that the basement hallway between server room B and the loading dock had exactly 1 camera, mounted at the wrong angle, covering about 60% of the corridor. She knew this because she had written the report recommending it be fixed twice. Both times, Marcus Webb, the hospital's chief operating officer, had flagged the request as low priority, pending budget review. The camera was still at the wrong angle. Naomi turned the heat down 1 notch. The stew was starting to talk. That low bubbling sound that meant the collagen was breaking down, the meat getting tender enough to fall off the bone. She put the lid on, crack and all, and wiped her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. Zuri. Bath time in 20 minutes. I'm not done drawing 20 minutes, baby. She leaned against the counter and let herself have 1 minute of quiet. Through the kitchen window, she could see the parking lot of the apartment complex, the asphalt still shimmering with heat, even though the sun had been down for an hour. Atlanta in July. The kind of hot that didn't cool off. It just aged into something heavier. In the living room, her laptop was open on the coffee table, displaying a dashboard she had built herself. 12 camera feeds, tiled in a grid, showing different sections of Meridian General in real time. This was her side project, the one Marcus Webb didn't know about yet. An AI-driven behavioral recognition system that could flag unusual movement patterns in hospital corridors, detect patients wandering unsupervised, identify unauthorized personnel in restricted areas. She had been developing the algorithm for 8 months, running it on a separate server she had requisitioned through the IT research budget. A line item so small, nobody in administration ever reviewed it. The system used a set of prototype cameras she had installed herself. Tiny, wide-angle, high-resolution. Positioned in locations she had chosen specifically because the existing security cameras had gaps, including the basement hallway between server room B and the loading dock. Naomi had not installed that camera to catch anyone doing anything. She had installed it because her algorithm needed data from low-traffic corridors to calibrate its movement detection sensitivity. That was the truth. That was the reason she would put on paper if anyone ever asked. But there was another reason she never wrote down. A reason that lived in the same place as the photograph on the refrigerator and the crack in the Dutch oven lid. Her mother, Yvonne Cartwright, had died at Meridian General Hospital 25 years ago. Naomi was 9. Complications during labor, they said. Hemorrhaging. The doctors said they did everything they could. Her grandmother Estelle never believed them. For years, she would say the same thing. Always quiet. Always while cooking, never looking up from the pot. They let her bleed because they didn't think her blood was worth stopping. Naomi never found out if that was true. The records were incomplete. The hospital said some files had been lost during a system migration in 2006. Maybe they had. Maybe they hadn't. But the not knowing had shaped Naomi the way water shapes stone, slowly, invisibly, permanently. She didn't work at Meridian General to get revenge. She worked there because she believed that if the right person was watching, if the system was built correctly, if every corner of every hallway was visible and recorded and preserved, then what happened to her mother could not happen to someone else. That was the version she told herself, the cleaner version. Underneath it, in the part of her chest that tightened every time she walked past the labor and delivery wing on the 4th floor, was something less clean. Something that sounded more like, I will make sure this building cannot hide anything from anyone ever again. She checked the stew one more time, tasted the broth with a wooden spoon, added a pinch more salt, and put the lid back on.
Zuri, 10 minutes. Mama, can I bring my crayons in the bath? No.
Ma'am? Why not? Because crayons and water don't mix. But what if I just hold them above the water? Naomi looked at her daughter, sitting there with purple smudges on her fingers and an argument already loaded. 7 years old and already a litigator. Bath, 10 minutes. No crayons. Zuri sighed the way only a 7-year-old can sigh, with her entire body, and went back to drawing. Naomi smiled. It was the last easy smile she would have for a long time. At 10:15, she kissed Zuri's forehead, handed her off to Miss Lorraine next door, the retired schoolteacher who watched Zuri on Sunday nights in exchange for a plate of whatever Naomi had cooked, and drove her 2017 Honda Accord 12 minutes down Cascade Road to Meridian General. The parking lot was half empty. The emergency department entrance glowed white against the dark. 2 ambulances sat idle near the bay, engines off. The security desk inside the main lobby was staffed by a young guy named Terrell, who always had earbuds in one ear and a textbook open on the counter. He was studying for the MCAT. Naomi liked him. Evening, Miss Cartwright. Evening, Terrell. How's organic chemistry treating you? He made a face that answered the question. She badged through the employee entrance, walked past the cafeteria, which smelled like reheated lasagna and industrial coffee, and took the service elevator to the basement.
The hallway stretched out ahead of her, fluorescent lights buzzing with that particular frequency that lived somewhere between hum and headache.
The floor was polished concrete, the walls painted a green that might have been cheerful in 1987. Somewhere behind the walls, the building's HVAC system exhaled its steady mechanical breath. Server room B was at the end of the hall, Naomi's kingdom. She swiped her badge, heard the lock click, and stepped into the cool blue glow of rack-mounted servers, blinking status lights, and the constant white noise of cooling fans. She set her bag down on the desk, pulled up her monitoring dashboard, and checked every feed. 12 cameras, all active, all recording. She put in her earbuds and pressed play on her phone. Lauryn Hill's voice filled her head, low and clear. X Factor. The song she always played when she worked alone down here because it made the basement feel less like a basement and more like somewhere a person had chosen to be. Naomi didn't know it yet, but in 9 days, this hallway, the one with the single camera mounted at the wrong angle, would become the most important 60 feet of corridor in the state of Georgia. And the man who would make it so had just pulled his patrol car into the hospital parking lot, adjusted his badge, and walked through the ER entrance like he owned the building. Sergeant Dale Rennick had been working off-duty security at Meridian General for 5 years, 4 nights a week, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in full Atlanta Police Department uniform. Badge catching the fluorescent light every time he turned a corner. The hospital paid the department paid Rennick, and everyone involved considered it a bargain. A real cop in the building meant the ER staff felt safer during the overnight shift, when the waiting room filled with people who had nowhere else to go and tempers that had been simmering since noon. Rennick was 6'2", 240, with a neck that started at his ears and shoulders that tested the seams of his uniform shirt. He had a way of standing in doorways, not blocking them exactly, but filling them, so that anyone who wanted to pass had to acknowledge him first. He called it presence. He had learned it in his first year on the force. Back when his training officer told him the most important tool a cop carries isn't his weapon, it's the space he takes up. He was 44 years old, married. 2 kids, both in middle school. He coached his son's flag football team on Saturdays and brought donuts to the nurse's station every first Monday of the month, glazed from Krispy Kreme, still warm. The nurses loved it. Some of them loved him, or said they did, because it was easier to love the man with the badge and the donuts than to think too carefully about the other things. The other things were small. That was what made them work. A hand on the lower back that lingered 1 second past friendly. A comment about how someone looked in their scrubs, delivered with a smile that dared you to take offense. Standing too close in the elevator, close enough that you could smell his cologne, something woodsy and aggressive, and feel the heat off his body, but not so close that you could call it anything. The art of the almost, the science of the line you could never quite prove he crossed. Naomi first noticed it 3 months into her time at Meridian. She was in the cafeteria, late shift, eating a granola bar and reviewing footage logs on her laptop. Rennick sat down across from her without asking. "You're the camera girl, right?" She looked up. "I'm the surveillance systems engineer." Right, camera girl." He grinned. He had straight teeth and a grin that was all performance, all muscle movement, nothing behind the eyes. "Must be nice watching everybody all day. I don't watch people. I maintain systems. Same thing, isn't it?" He leaned back, arms spread wide on the back of the booth, taking up as much room as possible. Then his eyes dropped not to her face. Lower. A slow scan chest to waist, the kind of look that wasn't quick enough to be accidental and wasn't long enough to be reported. He brought his eyes back up and smiled again. "Well, you ever need anything down in that basement, you let me know, I'm around." He knocked twice on the table with his knuckles, like he was closing a deal, and walked away. Naomi sat there for a moment. The granola bar tasted like cardboard. She closed her laptop, picked up her things, and went back to the basement. She didn't tell anyone about the conversation because there was nothing to tell. That was the geometry of it. Every angle calculated to leave no evidence. Over the next several months, the encounters accumulated like sediment. He would appear in hallways where he had no reason to be. The basement level was not part of his patrol route. The hospital's security protocol assigned him to the ER, the main lobby, and the parking structure. But Naomi would hear his boots on the polished concrete, at least once a week. Heavy steps, deliberate, the kind of walk that wanted to be heard before it was seen. "Working late again," he would say, leaning against the wall outside server room. Be dedicated. "I like that in a woman." Or he would pass her in the corridor, and his hand would find the small of her back as he squeezed by, even though the hallway was 6 feet wide and there was no reason to squeeze by anything. "Excuse me, sweetheart," he would say, and keep walking. Sweetheart, baby girl, gorgeous, never her name. He knew her name. She had heard him use it exactly once, when Marcus Webb was standing nearby. "Miss Cartwright," he had said, professional as a press conference. The moment Webb turned the corner, it was back to sweetheart. Naomi started keeping a log. Not because she had a plan, because she needed to see the pattern written down, outside of her own head, to confirm that what she was experiencing was real, and not something she was manufacturing from anxiety and overtime. A Google Doc, password protected, time-stamped entries, date, time, location, what he said, what he did, who else was present, whether a camera covered the area. That last column was almost always the same. No coverage or partial wrong angle. She noticed that too. Rennick never did anything in front of a working camera. Not once. 5 years in this building had taught him the blind spots the way a hunter learns a forest. He knew where the eyes were and where they weren't, and he operated exclusively in the dark spaces between them. The other women knew. Of course they knew. Denise Holloway, the night shift charge nurse, was the first person Naomi ever saw flinch at the sound of his boots. It was subtle, a stiffening of the shoulders, a half step to the side. The way you move when you hear a sound you have learned to associate with something unpleasant. Denise was 47, had been at Meridian for 12 years, and carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from keeping people alive on 4 hours of sleep. She wore her reading glasses on top of her head like a crown. She called everyone baby or sugar, regardless of rank. She did not flinch at anything, except his boots. Naomi saw it one night in the ER corridor and understood something without a single word being spoken. She filed it in the same place she filed everything else. The log, the pattern, the architecture of silence. One Thursday night in late May, Naomi was in the basement. It was close to 1 a.m. She had been troubleshooting a firmware issue on the server that fed the ICU monitoring system, the kind of work that required concentration and quiet. Lauryn Hill was in her earbuds.
The hallway outside was empty. She heard the door to the stairwell open, then the boots. She pulled one earbud out. Rennick appeared at the end of the corridor, full uniform badge.
Duty belt with the firearm, the taser, the radio, all of it. He walked toward her the way he always walked, like the building had been built around him and everyone else was just passing through.
"There she is," he said. "My favorite night owl."
Naomi kept her face neutral. "Sergeant." "Oh, we're being formal tonight?" He stopped about 3 feet from her. Then he took one step closer. 2 feet. She could smell the cologne. "You know, Naomi, I've been meaning to tell you something," he said her name. That was new. "You carry yourself different than the other women around here."
Got that? I don't know. His eyes traveled down, past her face, past her collarbone, settling on her chest with a look that moved at the speed of intention. That confidence.
"It shows." He lingered on the word, let it sit in the air, in everything. Naomi's hands were at her sides. She pressed her fingertips into her thighs, hard, because the alternative was something she couldn't afford. "I have work to finish. I'm just giving you a compliment." His voice pitched up half an octave, the tone of a man rehearsing his defense before the offense is even complete. Can't a man appreciate a beautiful woman anymore? She turned to walk back towards server room B. She took 2 steps. His hand caught her by the waist from behind. Not a grab, a placement. 5 fingers spreading across her hip, sliding forward across her stomach, pulling her back half a step. His chest against her shoulder blade, his breath on the side of her neck.
"Come on now," he said, quiet, almost a whisper. "Don't be like that." His other hand came up. He pressed his palm flat against her chest, fingers wide, and held it there for 2 full seconds.
2 seconds that lasted a year. Then he squeezed, not hard, almost gentle. "The way you test the ripeness of fruit at a grocery store?" He said, like he was confirming something to himself. Naomi's body did what bodies do when the mind has not yet caught up. She froze. Every muscle locked. Her breath stopped in her throat like a word she couldn't finish. The fluorescent light above them buzzed and flickered once, and in that half-second of dimness, the hallway felt like it had swallowed her whole. Then he let go, stepped back, adjusted his belt the way men adjust their belts when they want to remind you what's on it. "Relax, sweetheart." He was smiling, the same smile, all muscle, nothing behind the eyes.
"I was just checking to make sure you didn't have anything you're not supposed to have down here. Security check."
It's my job? He pointed at his badge with 2 fingers, casual the way you point at a parking sign. "You have a good night now." He turned and walked down the corridor.
His boots echoed until the stairwell door opened and closed. Then the hallway was silent except for the HVAC and the fluorescent light, which was still buzzing, and Lauryn Hill still singing in the earbud dangling against Naomi's collarbone. She stood there for a long time. She didn't know how long. Long enough for her hands to start shaking. Long enough for the shaking to move up her arms and into her shoulders and settle somewhere behind her sternum, where it would stay for weeks. She walked into server room B. She sat down in her chair. She put both hands flat on the desk, the way you put your hands on the ground after an earthquake to make sure the floor is still there. And she stared at the blue glow of the server lights until her vision went soft. Then she opened her laptop, opened the Google Doc, and typed date, time, location, what he said, what he did. Who else was present? No one. Camera coverage, partial, wrong angle, main system. Then she added a new column she had never used before. Secondary coverage, prototype cam B7, active recording. Full corridor view. She stared at that last line for a long time. She had not installed that camera to catch Dale Rennick. She had installed it to test an algorithm. But the camera did not know the difference. It saw what it saw, and what it saw was everything. Naomi saved the document, closed the laptop, pulled her earbud out and wound the cord around her phone with hands that were still trembling. Somewhere above her, Rennick was walking through the ER, nodding at nurses, checking his phone, existing in the world as if the last 5 minutes had not happened. Because for him, they hadn't. For him, It was a Tuesday. A nothing. A moment that would leave no mark on his memory because it had never left a mark before. He didn't know that 60 feet below him, behind a locked door in a room full of humming servers, a woman was sitting perfectly still, and the building was remembering what he had done. The next morning, Naomi did not report what happened. She drove home at 6:30 a.m. with the windows down because the air conditioning in the Accord had been unreliable since April. The Atlanta dawn was already warm, the sky that pale orange that comes before the heat settles in and refuses to leave. She picked up Zuri from Miss Lorraine's apartment, carried her daughter to the car still half asleep, buckled her into the booster seat, and drove home in silence. Zuri woke up halfway there. "Mama, you smell like the hospital? I know." "Baby, like the cleaning stuff, I know." Zuri studied her mother's face in the rearview mirror, the way children study things they don't have words for yet. Then she went back to sleep. Naomi did not report what happened because she had watched other women report things at Meridian General, and she had memorized what happened to each one of them. There was Keisha Bryant, a phlebotomist on the 3rd floor, who reported that Rennick had pressed himself against her in the supply closet on a night shift 18 months ago. Keisha filed a complaint with Human Resources. HR interviewed Rennick. Rennick said Keisha had misunderstood a friendly interaction. HR noted that there were no witnesses and no camera footage of the supply closet. The complaint was filed as inconclusive. 3 months later, Keisha's schedule was changed to all-day shifts, which meant she lost her night differential pay,
Which meant she lost $400 a month, which meant she couldn't make her car payment.
which meant she left Meridian General for a clinic in Decatur that paid less but didn't have a man in a badge standing in every hallway. Keisha never said Rennick's name out loud again. There was Carmen Vega, a respiratory therapist, who told her supervisor that Rennick had commented on her body in the parking structure. The supervisor said, "Did anyone else hear it?" Carmen said no. The supervisor said, "I'll make a note. The note was never found." Carmen stopped parking in the structure and started parking on the street 2 blocks away, adding 12 minutes to her walk in the dark. She carried her keys between her fingers the whole way. There was Denise Holloway, who never reported anything at all. Naomi knew the math. The system was not broken. The system was functioning exactly as designed.
Complaints without evidence were filed and forgotten. Complaints with evidence were reclassified until the evidence didn't count.
And the man with the badge kept walking the hallways, bringing donuts on the first Monday, calling women sweetheart, and operating in the blind spots he had memorized like scripture. So Naomi did not report. Not yet. Instead, she did what she was trained to do. She built a system. The first thing she did was verify the footage. That same afternoon, after Zuri went to Miss Lorraine's for her regular Monday playdate, Naomi sat on her couch with her laptop and logged into the prototype camera server through an encrypted VPN she had configured herself, Camera B7. Basement corridor between server room B and the loading dock. Timestamp the previous night, 12:51 a.m. The video was clean. Wide angle, high resolution, the prototype lens she had installed specifically for low-light corridor testing. The frame showed the full hallway, both walls, the overhead light, and every inch of floor from the stairwell door to the entrance of server room B. She watched it once. Her own body appearing from the right side of the frame, walking toward the server room. Then Rennick, entering from the stairwell, the approach. The conversation she could not hear because the prototype cameras did not record audio, but the body language was louder than any microphone. His posture closing distance, her posture retreating. His hands, where they went, how long they stayed. Her freeze, his casual walk away, adjusting his belt. She watched it a second time. On the second viewing, she noticed something she had missed while it was happening to her. After he let go, after he stepped back and smiled, he glanced up. Directly at the main security camera mounted on the wall, he looked at it for a full second. Then he adjusted his position 3 inches to the left and delivered his parting line from the spot where he knew the camera's blind zone began. He had rehearsed this. The geometry of the hallway, the angle of the camera, the exact position where he became invisible to the system. He had done this before. Not just with her, with all of them. This was choreography. Naomi closed the laptop. She sat in the silence of her apartment and listened to the air conditioner rattle in the window. Then she opened the laptop again and created a new folder on the prototype server. She named it Corridor Calibration Data, Phase 2. She moved the footage into the folder. She set the server's automatic deletion protocol to exempt this folder from the standard 30-day purge cycle. She was not building a case. Not yet. She was preserving evidence the way her grandmother preserved food, carefully, quietly. Against a winter she could feel coming. That week, she called Terrence Okafor. Terry had been her friend since freshman orientation at Spelman, when she was 18 and terrified and pretending not to be. And he was across the street at Morehouse doing the same thing. They had stayed close through college, through his law school years at Howard, through her graduate work at Georgia Tech, through his father's death and her grandmother's decline, and all the ordinary catastrophes that make up a life between 20 and 35. He was a civil rights attorney now, junior partner at a small firm in Midtown that specialized in police misconduct and employment discrimination cases. He carried a leather notebook everywhere, cracked and soft with use, that had belonged to his father. He wrote in it with a fountain pen that cost $9 because he said expensive pens were for people who wanted to look like writers, not people who needed to write. She didn't tell him everything on the phone. She told him enough. "I need to understand something," she said. "If an off-duty police officer does something while he's working security at a private business, and the person he does it to tries to sue him, what happens?" Terry was quiet for a moment. She could hear him clicking his pen, a habit he had when he was thinking. "Depends on the state. In Georgia, it's complicated. He's wearing the uniform, the badge, carrying the weapon, all the symbols of state authority, but he's being paid by the hospital. So when you sue, the first thing his lawyer is going to argue is qualified immunity, which means the court might decide that because he was acting in what looked like a law enforcement capacity, he's protected from personal liability. Even if what he did had nothing to do with law enforcement, even if the hospital was paying his check. The badge gives him a shield, and the shield doesn't come off just because the paycheck comes from a different source." Naomi stared at the wall. "So he can do whatever he wants and nobody can touch him." "No," I said, "it's complicated. Qualified immunity has limits." If his actions were clearly personal, clearly not related to any law enforcement function, and if there's strong enough evidence to establish a pattern, a judge can rule that immunity doesn't apply. "But you need evidence? Not a he said, she said. Documentation, witnesses, and ideally something a jury can see with their own eyes. Like video. Video would change everything." He paused. "Naomi, do you have video?" She didn't answer right away. She was thinking about the server in her apartment, the encrypted folder, the footage sitting inside it like a seed in dark soil.
I might. Then we need to talk in person. And you need to not tell anyone else about this until we do. Not your supervisor, not HR, not your best friend.
Nobody. Why?
Because the moment the hospital finds out evidence exists, their legal team will move to control it. Preservation letters, internal audits, server access reviews. They'll find the footage and they'll find a reason to make it disappear. That's not paranoia, Naomi. That's procedure. They met the following Saturday at a coffee shop on Edgewood Avenue, a place with exposed brick walls and too many plants. Terry brought his father's notebook. Naomi brought her laptop. She showed him the footage. He watched it twice without speaking. The second time, he paused it at the moment Rennick glanced up at the main camera and adjusted his position. "He knows where the cameras are," Terry said. "He's been here 5 years. He knows every blind spot in the building, but he doesn't know about this camera. No, it's a prototype. Part of a research project I'm running. It's on a separate server, separate network, separate everything. The hospital's IT department doesn't even have login credentials for it." Terry wrote something in his notebook. Then he looked at her. "You built a system that sees what the hospital's system was designed to miss. I built a system to test an algorithm. What it captured was an accident." "That's fine. That's good, actually. It means there was no entrapment. You didn't set a trap, you set up a research tool, and the research tool recorded what happened to be in front of it." He tapped his pen on the notebook. But one incident isn't enough. Not for what we'd need. What do we need? Pattern. Multiple incidents, ideally multiple victims, documented over time. One video of one encounter. A defense attorney can spin. He was conducting a security check. She misinterpreted. He's a decorated officer. But if you have a pattern, if you can show this is habitual, systematic, targeted, then qualified immunity cracks. And if the hospital knew and failed to act, they're liable too. Naomi thought about Keisha Bryant, driving to Decatur, Carmen Vega, walking 2 blocks in the dark, Denise Holloway, flinching at the sound of boots. "There are other women," she said. "How many?" "I don't know yet. At least 3 that I've seen. Probably more." Terry closed his notebook.
Then we need 2 things. We need the camera to keep recording, and we need those women to be willing to talk. Not to HR, not to the department, to me.
On the record, that's the hard part. I know. Naomi drove home that evening through midtown traffic, past the Fox Theater and the gold dome of the state capitol building catching the last light. She thought about Keisha, who had already lost $400 a month for speaking up. She thought about Carmen, who carried her keys like a weapon every night. She thought about Denise, who had 12 years at Meridian and a husband with cancer and every reason in the world to stay quiet. She was asking them to risk everything on the chance that this time the system would work, that this time the evidence would be strong enough, the lawyer sharp enough, the judge honest enough. That this time, the badge would not be enough to make everything disappear. She pulled into her apartment complex. The parking lot was quiet. Miss Lorraine's window was lit up on the 2nd floor. Naomi sat in the car for a minute, engine running, hands on the wheel, her phone buzzed. A text from Zuri, typed with Miss Lorraine's help. "Mama, I drew you a picture, it's purple." Naomi smiled. Then she turned the engine off and went inside. The following Tuesday night, Naomi was restocking printer paper in the supply room on the 2nd floor when Denise Holloway walked in. Denise had her reading glasses on top of her head, a clipboard under one arm, and the expression of someone who had been arguing with a doctor and winning. "Hey, sugar," Denise said, reaching past Naomi for a box of gloves. "You doing all right? You've been quiet lately. Just busy." Denise pulled the box down and tucked it under her other arm.
She started to leave. Then she stopped in the doorway.
"Didn't turn around. I heard him," Denise said. Her voice dropped half a register, the way voices do when they cross from casual into something heavier. "Last Thursday in the basement. I was coming down to check on a medication fridge, and I heard him in the hallway. I didn't see anything, but I heard the way he was talking." Naomi didn't move. "What did you hear?" "Enough." Denise still hadn't turned around. Enough to know it wasn't the first time. Silence. The supply room hummed with the sound of the ventilation system pushing recycled air through the building. "Denise?" "I can't, Naomi." Now she turned. Her eyes were steady, but her jaw was tight, the muscles working beneath the skin. "I have 11 more years until my pension. Ray's treatment costs us $800 a month after insurance. I can't afford to be Keisha Bryant." "I'm not asking you to be Keisha Bryant." "Then what are you asking?" Naomi held her gaze. She did not answer the question because she did not yet have an answer that was honest enough to deserve one. She just said, "When I do ask, I'm going to have something Keisha didn't have." Denise looked at her for a long time. She adjusted her reading glasses. She shifted the clipboard under her arm. "You come find me when you're ready," she said. "But you better come correct, because I'm only doing this once." She walked out. Her sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. The supply room door swung shut. Naomi stood alone in the fluorescent silence and understood something with perfect clarity. She was not just building a case against Dale Rennick. She was building a bridge strong enough for other women to walk across. And if the bridge collapsed, every woman who stepped onto it would fall. She could not afford to be wrong. That night, she went back to the basement. She logged into the prototype server. Camera B7 had been recording continuously for 9 days since the incident. She scrolled through the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of empty hallway, and found what she was afraid she would find: Rennick. In the same corridor, 3 nights after the incident with Naomi, Different woman, a young environmental services worker Naomi recognized but didn't know by name, maybe 22 or 23, pushing a cleaning cart. Rennick appeared from the stairwell. Same walk, same closing of distance. He said something. The woman laughed, the kind of laugh that is not a laugh but a shield. He put his hand on her shoulder. It slid down her back. She stepped sideways. He followed. More words. His hand found her waist. She pulled away. He held on for 1 second, 2 seconds, then let go, adjusted his belt, walked away. The same choreography, the same stage, the same script performed on a different body. Naomi saved the footage, named the file, added it to the folder. Her hands were steady this time. Not because the shaking had stopped, but because it had been replaced by something colder and more useful. She opened her phone and texted Terry, "We have a pattern." 3 dots appeared. Then his reply, "Good. Don't stop recording and find me that young woman's name." The young woman's name was Adrienne Lucas. She was 23 from Macon, and she had been working the overnight environmental services shift at Meridian General for 7 months. Naomi found her name on the cleaning crew roster posted inside the break room on the first floor, matched her face to the footage, and spent 2 days figuring out how to approach her without sounding like a lawyer, a reporter, or a threat. She found her opportunity on a Wednesday night, in the break room, at 1:40 a.m. Adrienne was sitting alone at one of the round tables, eating a cup of instant noodles and scrolling her phone. She had her hair pulled back in a low ponytail and wore the same gray scrubs the environmental services crew all wore, with her name badge clipped to the pocket. She looked tired the way people who work overnight look tired. Not sleepy, but dimmed like someone had turned her brightness down to save power. Naomi bought a bag of chips from the vending machine she didn't want and sat at the next table. Not the same table, close enough to talk, far enough to leave. "Long night?" Naomi said. Adrienne glanced up. "They're all long. I feel that. I'm Naomi, by the way. I work in the basement surveillance systems. I know who you are." "The camera lady." Adrienne said it without edge, just identification. "I've seen you down there." They talked for a few minutes about nothing, the vending machine that always ate quarters, the cafeteria's coffee, which Adrienne described as battery acid in a styrofoam cup, the parking lot lights on the south side that had been out for 3 weeks, normal things, the small currency of shared workplace misery. Then Naomi said, "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me to mind my own business." Adrienne put her phone down. "Okay." "The officer who works security at night. Sergeant Rennick? Has he ever made you uncomfortable?" The change was immediate, not dramatic, not a gasp or a flinch, but a recalibration. Adrienne's shoulders pulled in half an inch. Her eyes moved to the break room door, checking who was there, who might hear, her hand wrapped tighter around the noodle cup. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because he made me uncomfortable, and I think he's done it to other people. And I'm trying to understand how big this is." Adrienne was quiet for a long time. She stirred her noodles with a plastic fork. Around and around the same circle. "He touches you," she said, finally. "Not like that, but like he puts his hand on you and you know it's not right, but it's not enough to scream about, you know? And he knows that. He knows it's in that in-between place where if you say something people look at you like you're crazy." She put the fork down. "I told my supervisor. You know what she said?" She said, "He's just friendly, honey. That's how cops are." When did it start? My second week? Naomi felt something move in her chest. Second week, 7 months ago. This girl had been carrying this for 7 months. Alone, 23 years old, 100 miles from home. "Adrienne, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that?" Adrienne nodded. "I have video. Security footage from a camera he doesn't know about. A camera I installed for a research project. I have footage of what he did to me. And I have footage of what he did to you. I'm working with a lawyer. We're building a case, not through HR, not through the police department, through the courts. And I want you to know that I will never use your footage without your permission. But I want you to know it exists, and it shows exactly what happened, and nobody can call you crazy when the whole world can see it." Adrienne stared at her. Her eyes were wet, but nothing fell. She pressed her lips together until they disappeared into a thin line. "You have it on video?" she said. "Yes. He doesn't know. No." Adrienne looked at the break room door again. Then back at Naomi. "My mama told me not to start trouble at this job. She said just keep your head down and get your check. I understand that. No, you don't. My mama cleans offices in Macon for $11 an hour. She took out a loan so I could move up here. If I lose this job, she can't make the payments." Naomi let the silence hold. She did not rush it. She did not fill it with reassurance she couldn't guarantee. "I'm not asking you to decide right now," Naomi said. "I'm asking you to know that you're not alone. That's all. For right now, that's all." Adrienne picked up her fork, stirred the noodles one more time. "For right now," she repeated. Then she stood up, dropped the cup in the trash, and walked back to her cleaning cart without looking back. Naomi sat in the break room and finished the chips she didn't want. Her phone buzzed. A text from Terry. "Any progress on the name?" She typed back. "Her name is Adrienne. Give her time." 2 weeks passed. The camera kept recording. Rennick kept walking his routes. Naomi kept logging. She had 14 entries in the Google Doc. Now each one a small, deniable encounter. A comment here, a touch there, a look that lasted too long. The pattern was undeniable on paper, but paper was not what Terry needed. Terry needed the footage, and the footage was growing. Then, on a Monday morning, Naomi's world shifted. She arrived at work for a daytime meeting with the IT department, a routine quarterly review of the hospital's surveillance infrastructure. Marcus Webb was there. She had seen him dozens of times, always in the same gray suit, always with the same coffee cup he never seemed to drink from, always looking at his laptop screen when someone else was talking. He had a face built for conference rooms, smooth and agreeable and forgettable. The face of a man whose primary skill was making problems feel like they had already been solved. The meeting was normal for 45 minutes. Status updates, budget projections, a discussion about upgrading the ER cameras to 4K resolution. Naomi gave her portion of the presentation, answered 2 questions, and sat back down. Then Webb said, almost as an aside, "Naomi, I want to flag something. I've been reviewing departmental productivity metrics, and I'm seeing some gaps in your maintenance logs over the past few weeks. Nothing major, but I'd like us to set up a one-on-one to go over expectations, just to make sure we're aligned." He said it casually. He said it in front of everyone. He even smiled. Naomi's hands went flat on the table. The same instinct she'd had in the basement. "Press down, stay still, don't let them see what's underneath, of course," she said. Happy to discuss after the meeting. She sat in her car in the parking structure for 10 minutes. There were no gaps in her maintenance logs. She knew this because she was meticulous about documentation. She had been meticulous her entire career because she understood the way every black woman in a technical field understands that her work would be audited more closely, questioned more frequently, and forgiven less easily than anyone else's. Her logs were perfect. Marcus Webb knew her logs were perfect. This was not about productivity. This was a message. Someone had told Webb that Naomi was asking questions. Someone had told Webb that Naomi was talking to other women. Naomi didn't know who. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the machine had noticed her, and the machine was beginning to push back. She drove home. She picked up Zuri. She cooked dinner on autopilot, mac and cheese from a box, because she didn't have the energy for anything else, and sat at the kitchen table while Zuri ate, and talked about a boy in her class named Deshaun who could hold his breath for a really long time.
Mama, are you listening? I'm listening, baby. You're not looking at me. Naomi looked at her daughter. Purple crayon smudges on her fingers, as always, a gap where her front tooth used to be. Eyes that missed nothing. "I'm listening," Naomi said again, and this time she meant it. That night, after Zuri was asleep, Naomi logged into the prototype server from her laptop. She navigated to the corridor calibration data, Phase 2 folder. She clicked on it. The folder was empty. She stared at the screen, refreshed the page, refreshed it again, typed the directory path manually, ran a search for the file names she had memorized. Nothing. She checked the server logs at 3:17 p.m.
That afternoon, while she was sitting in Marcus Webb's meeting having her work ethic questioned, someone had accessed the prototype server. The login credentials used were not hers.
They were a generic IT administrator account, the kind of default login that exists on every system in every hospital in the country because nobody ever bothers to change it.
Somebody had found her server. Somebody had found her folder. Somebody had deleted every file inside it. Naomi closed the laptop. She opened it. She closed it again. She stood up from the couch and walked to the kitchen and stood in front of the stove. The Dutch oven was on the back burner where it always lived, black and heavy and cracked. She put both hands on the counter and leaned forward until her forehead almost touched the cabinet above the stove. The building had swallowed the evidence.
The system she had built, the cameras she had installed, the footage she had preserved, all of it erased by someone with a default password and 45 seconds of access.
The same building that had swallowed her mother's medical records. The same system that had swallowed Keisha Bryant's complaint. The same silence that swallowed everything. She could feel it closing around her. The walls, the math. She was a 34-year-old single mother with a 7-year-old daughter and a mortgage-sized student loan balance and no family safety net. If she lost this job, she lost health insurance. If she lost health insurance, she lost Zuri's pediatric dental coverage, her own prescriptions, the annual eye exam that caught the early signs of the glaucoma her grandmother had. Everything was connected to everything. Pull one thread and the whole fabric tore. She could stop right now, delete the Google Doc, stop recording, accept the productivity review and perform contrition, and keep her head down and collect her check, just like Adrienne's mama said. Nobody would blame her. Nobody would even know. Her hands were shaking. Not the fine tremor from the night in the basement. A deeper vibration, the kind that starts in the diaphragm and works its way out to the fingertips. The body's way of saying it has been holding too much weight for too long. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove. The clock on the microwave said 1:52 a.m. The apartment was quiet. From Zuri's room, the faint sound of her daughter breathing in sleep. Naomi looked at the Dutch oven, the crack in the lid, that thin line running from handle to rim that her cousin Drea always said meant it was time for a new pot. Estelle never replaced it. Estelle said, "Baby, the things that been through the fire don't break the same way twice. This pot held together through everything I put it through. You think a little crack is going to stop it?" And then the other thing Estelle used to say, always in the kitchen, always while stirring something, never looking up.
Don't you ever let nobody turn your voice off, you hear me? This pot right here, it feeds the whole family, but it started with one little flame. You be that flame, Naomi.
Everything else catches from you? Man, can we just sit with that for a second? Because this is where most people quit. This is where the math wins.
This is where a woman looks at everything she has to lose and decides the cost is too high. And Naomi almost did. She stood in that kitchen for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't punch anything. She just stood there, one hand on the counter, one hand on the cracked lid of a Dutch oven that was older than her mother would have been, and she let the shaking do what it needed to do. Then she heard a sound behind her. Mama? Zuri was standing in the kitchen doorway, bare feet on the linoleum, a stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. Her eyes were puffy with sleep. Mama? How come you don't smile anymore? The question landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. It didn't splash. It just sank, straight down, into the deepest part of everything Naomi had been carrying. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and picked her daughter up. Zuri was getting big, almost too big to carry, but Naomi held her like she weighed nothing. She pressed her face into Zuri's hair, which smelled like cocoa butter and the lavender detergent she used on the pillowcases, and she breathed in until her lungs couldn't hold any more. "I'm gonna smile again, baby," she said. "I promise." "When?" "Soon." Zuri put her head on Naomi's shoulder. Within 2 minutes, she was asleep again. Naomi carried her back to bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and stood in the doorway watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. Then she walked back to the kitchen. She opened her laptop. She logged into the prototype server one more time. The folder was empty. The footage from the main server was gone. But Naomi had built this system. She had designed every layer of its architecture. She had written the backup protocols, the redundancy pathways, the fail-safe triggers. And she had done something that whoever deleted those files didn't know about, because it wasn't in any manual and it wasn't on any diagram, and it existed only in a script she had written herself and embedded in the server's boot sequence 6 months ago when she was testing disaster recovery procedures. An automatic off-site backup every 72 hours. The prototype server mirrored its contents to an encrypted cloud partition that Naomi paid for with her own credit card. $19 a month, a partition that had no connection to the hospital's network, no link to their IT infrastructure, no credentials stored on any hospital device. She typed in the cloud partition address, entered her personal encryption key, waited 3 seconds. The folder appeared, every file, every timestamp, every frame of footage. Rennick in the hallway with Naomi. Rennick in the hallway with Adrienne. Rennick in the hallway with a third woman Naomi hadn't identified yet from 6 days ago. 3 incidents, 3 women. 1 man, 1 hallway, 1 pattern that no defense attorney could call a misunderstanding. They had deleted the copy. They had not known there was an original. Naomi sat at her kitchen table in the dark, the laptop screen casting blue light on her face, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the shaking stop. Not because the fear was gone. The fear was still there, crouching in the space between her ribs, heavy and patient. But something else had arrived alongside it. Something that felt like the heat coming off a stovetop when you turn the flame on. Small at first, barely visible, but real. She texted Terry. 2 words. They tried. 30 seconds later, his reply. Tried what? Deleted the server footage. All of it, a pause. Then, please tell me you had a backup. Every 72 hours off-site. Encrypted, my personal cloud. A longer pause. Then 3 words that Naomi read 4 times. That changes everything. She closed the laptop. She looked at the Dutch oven on the stove, black and cracked and unbroken. She looked at the photograph of Estelle on the refrigerator, young and fierce in her church hat. One little flame. The next morning, Naomi called in sick for the first time in 3 years. She drove to the West End, to a hair salon on Cascade Road called Pearl's Place, where a woman named Pearl Whitaker had been doing hair for 31 years and collecting neighborhood intelligence for longer than that. Pearl was 64, 5 feet tall in platform shoes, and had never met a piece of gossip she couldn't verify within 48 hours. She was not Naomi's aunt by blood. But Naomi had been calling her Auntie Pearl since she was 12 years old because Pearl and Estelle had sung in the Greater Mount Zion Choir together for 2 decades. The salon smelled like shea butter and heat, and the particular chemical warmth of a flat iron on recently oiled hair. A gospel station played from a speaker mounted above the mirror.
4 chairs, 3 of them occupied. Conversation flowing like water. Pearl saw Naomi come in and pointed to the empty chair with her rat-tail comb. Sit down, baby.
You look like you haven't slept since Easter. I need to ask you something, Auntie Pearl. You can ask me anything while I do your edges. Sit. Naomi sat.
Pearl wrapped a cape around her shoulders and began working with the kind of hands that had touched 10,000 heads and remembered every single one. The officer at Meridian General, Naomi said, keeping her voice low. The one who works nights, Rennick. Pearl's hands didn't stop, but her eyes shifted to the mirror, meeting Naomi's reflection.
What about him? Has anyone else talked about him? Anyone from the hospital? Pearl was quiet for 3 strokes of the comb.
Then, without raising her voice, she said to the woman in the next chair, Sandra, turn that music up a little bit, will you, baby? Sandra turned the music up. Pearl leaned close to Naomi's ear. 2 women have sat in this chair in the last year and told me things about that man. I'm not going to tell you their names because they told me in confidence.
But I will tell you this. One of them cried so hard I had to redo her whole left side. Pearl met her eyes in the mirror again. Whatever you're doing, Naomi, you do it right.
Because those women deserve to know somebody heard them. Naomi left Pearl's place 2 hours later, with fresh edges and a weight in her chest that had shifted from burden to purpose. The fear was still there. The math was still ugly.
But the equation had changed, because the evidence was safe, and the evidence was growing, and the women who had been silenced were not as alone as they thought. She got in her car, sat in the parking lot, watched the heat ripple off the asphalt on Cascade Road. Then she called Terry. "I'm ready, set up the meetings, Denise first." Terry didn't ask if she was sure. He just said, "I'll have everything drafted by Friday." Naomi put the car in drive and pulled onto Cascade Road. The radio was off, the windows were up, the AC rattled and wheezed. In her rear-view mirror, the salon's neon sign flickered once, pink letters against the afternoon glare. Somewhere across town, Marcus Webb was sitting in his office on the 5th floor of Meridian General, composing an email to the head of IT requesting a full audit of unauthorized server activity on hospital networked research equipment. He typed carefully. He used the phrase data governance compliance 3 times. He CC'd the hospital's general counsel. He had no idea that the data he was trying to govern was already somewhere he would never find it. Terry filed the lawsuit on a Thursday. Cartwright v. Rennick, Meridian General Hospital, and the City of Atlanta. Civil action. Claims: sexual battery, hostile work environment, institutional negligence, retaliation, and failure to investigate. The filing was accompanied by a motion for emergency preservation of all security footage, personnel records, and internal communications at Meridian General Hospital dating back 3 years. The preservation order mattered more than the lawsuit itself. Terry had explained it to Naomi the night before, sitting at her kitchen table while Zuri slept in the next room. The moment this hits the court clerk's desk, the hospital's legal team will try to do exactly what they've already done: scrub servers, lose emails, reclassify records. The preservation order is a cage around the evidence. If they destroy anything after the order is served, it's spoliation. Federal offense. Their lawyers know this, which means the second they read this filing, every shredder in that building stops running. "But they already deleted my footage," Naomi said. Terry opened his father's leather notebook and turned it so she could see the page. He had drawn a diagram with his $9 fountain pen. 2 columns. On the left, what they deleted. On the right, what they don't know exists. The footage they deleted from the prototype server is evidence of destruction. That helps us. The footage on your personal cloud is the evidence itself. The defense will argue the cloud backup is inadmissible because it was collected without Rennick's knowledge. That's where pattern comes in. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings made in the context of criminal activity. If we can establish that the footage documents ongoing criminal conduct, sexual battery under Georgia code, the recordings are admissible even without his consent. And if the judge disagrees, then we appeal, but we won't need to, because the footage isn't the only evidence anymore. He turned the page. 3 names written in neat cursive: Denise Holloway, Adrienne Lucas. Tamika Reeves. Tamika Reeves was the 3rd woman on the footage, the one Naomi hadn't identified until 2 weeks ago. She was a 29-year-old lab technician, quiet, efficient, the kind of person who came to work, did her job, and went home without making a sound. Terry had found her through Adrienne, who had found her through whispered conversations in the break room at 2 a.m. Tamika's story was the same choreography in the same hallway. Rennick's hand on her hip while she waited for the service elevator. His breath on her neck while he told her she smelled good. Her freeze, his walk away. All 3 women had agreed to testify. Not easily. Not quickly. Denise had taken a full week and 3 conversations with Terry before she signed the declaration. She had cried once in Terry's office, the kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than sadness. From the place where you have been carrying something so heavy for so long that putting it down feels like losing a part of your own skeleton. Then she dried her eyes with a tissue from a box on Terry's desk, put her reading glasses back on top of her head, and said, "Where do I sign?" Adrienne had called her mother in Macon before deciding. The call lasted 40 minutes. When Adrienne showed up at Terry's office, she was wearing her work scrubs and carrying a folder of handwritten notes. Dates, times, locations, descriptions of every encounter she could remember. 7 months of records kept in a composition notebook she stored in her locker at the hospital. She had been documenting everything, not because she had a plan,
because she needed proof she wasn't imagining it.
Terry looked at the notebook, then at Adrienne, and said, "You've been building your own case this whole time."
My mama taught me to keep receipts, Adrienne said. The hospital's legal team responded within 72 hours. Their answer was exactly what Terry predicted: a motion to dismiss on grounds of qualified immunity. Sergeant Dale Rennick, as a sworn officer of the Atlanta Police Department, was acting within the scope of his law enforcement duties while providing security at Meridian General Hospital. Any physical contact during his patrols was consistent with standard security procedures. The plaintiff's claims were based on subjective interpretations of routine professional interactions. Terry read the motion out loud to Naomi in his office. When he finished, he set it down on his desk and looked at her. This is the playbook, every time. The badge is a magic word that turns assault into security procedure. They're going to say every touch was a pat-down, every comment was a professional observation. Every time he stood too close, he was maintaining tactical proximity. Tactical proximity, Naomi repeated. That's what they'll call it. And the video? The video is why we win? Because tactical proximity doesn't grab a woman's chest. Tactical proximity doesn't slide its hand down someone's back and hold her waist while she tries to pull away. The video shows what words can deny. That's why we have it. And that's why they tried to destroy it. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in late August. Fulton County Superior Court. Judge Wanda Braxton presiding, a 61-year-old former public defender who had been on the bench for 14 years and had a reputation for two things. She started on time, and she did not tolerate theatrics. Naomi took the day off work. She had not been fired, not yet, but the performance review had intensified. Marcus Webb had scheduled 3 one-on-one meetings in the past month, each one producing a document with phrases like areas for improvement and alignment with departmental standards and expectations going forward. Her actual work had not changed. Her logs were still perfect. The documents were insulation, padding for the termination file they were building. Naomi knew this because she had seen the same thing happen to Keisha Bryant before Keisha's schedule was changed. The system had a pattern, too. She put on the navy blue blazer she wore to funerals and job interviews. She braided her hair the night before, 2 neat cornrows pulled back, the style her grandmother used to do for her before church. She dropped Zuri at Miss Lorraine's at 7:15 a.m. "Mama, how come you're wearing your fancy jacket? I have a meeting, baby." "Is it a good meeting or a bad meeting?" Naomi knelt down until she was eye level with her daughter. Purple crayon smudges on Zuri's fingers, as always. That gap-toothed smile that could crack open any wall Naomi had built around her chest. "It's a meeting where Mama's going to tell the truth," she said, "and we'll see what happens after that." The courtroom was smaller than she expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights that reminded her of the hospital basement. 4 rows of gallery seating, most of them empty. Terry sat at the plaintiff's table in a dark suit, his father's leather notebook open in front of him. Naomi sat beside him. Her hands were in her lap, fingers laced together, pressing hard. Across the aisle, Rennick sat with his attorney, a man named Garrett Sullivan, silver-haired, 3-piece suit, the kind of lawyer who billed $600 an hour and was worth it because he had spent 20 years turning guilty officers into victims of overzealous litigation. Sullivan had a legal pad in front of him, blank. He didn't need notes. He had given this speech before. Rennick was in civilian clothes. Khaki pants, a white button-down, no tie. Without the uniform, without the badge and the duty belt and the firearm, he looked smaller. Not small, just less. Like a stage actor seen in daylight. He sat with his arms crossed and his jaw working slowly, chewing nothing, the way people chew when they are grinding down something they cannot swallow. Behind Rennick, in the second row of the gallery, a woman sat alone. Patrice Rennick, 40 years old. She wore a gray dress and held a small purse on her lap with both hands, the way you hold something when you need to keep your hands occupied. She sat 2 seats away from the aisle end of the row. 2 seats away from the gap where her husband would walk in and out. Not far, not close, the exact distance of a woman who had already decided something but had not yet said it out loud. Marcus Webb was not in the courtroom. His attorney was a woman from the hospital's outside counsel, young, sharp-featured, taking notes on a tablet. She sat in the front row of the gallery, behind the defense table, close enough to whisper.
Judge Braxton entered. The room stood, she sat, the room sat. She looked at both tables over her reading glasses, the kind of look that said she had read every filing and had already formed preliminary opinions. "This is a hearing on the defendant's motion to dismiss on qualified immunity grounds," she said. "I've reviewed the briefs. Counsel for the defense, I'll hear your argument first." Sullivan stood. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, a gesture so practiced it looked involuntary. "Your Honor, the facts here are straightforward. Sergeant Rennick is a decorated 17-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department. For 5 years, he has served this community by providing security at Meridian General Hospital in an off-duty capacity, wearing his uniform, carrying his badge, performing law enforcement functions as authorized by the department. The plaintiff's allegations describe routine interactions that occurred during the normal course of his security duties. The physical contact she describes is consistent with standard pat-down and security screening procedures. Under Georgia law and established federal precedent, Sergeant Rennick is entitled to qualified immunity because his actions were performed under color of law enforcement authority." Sullivan paused. "Let the words settle. Furthermore, Your Honor, the video evidence the plaintiff seeks to introduce was obtained without Sergeant Rennick's knowledge or consent, using unauthorized surveillance equipment installed without hospital approval on hospital property. This evidence should be excluded, and without it, the plaintiff's claims rest entirely on subjective testimony." He sat down. Rennick uncrossed his arms and placed his hands flat on the table. He looked at the judge the way he looked at the main security camera in the hospital basement, measuring the angle, calculating the exposure. Terry stood. He did not button his jacket. He picked up his father's notebook, opened it to a marked page, and held it in one hand like a minister holding a Bible. "Your Honor, I'd like to address the immunity argument first, because it is the foundation of the defense's case, and it is built on sand." Sullivan's pen stopped moving. Qualified immunity protects officers acting within the scope of their law enforcement duties. The key word is scope. Sergeant Rennick was hired by Meridian General Hospital to provide security in the emergency department, the main lobby, and the parking structure. His assigned patrol route is documented in the hospital's security contract, which I have submitted as Exhibit 4. The basement corridor where every incident occurred is not on that route. He had no security function in that area. He was not conducting pat-downs, because pat-downs are not part of his contracted duties at this facility. He was not performing security screenings, because the basement corridor has no screening checkpoint. He was in a location he was not assigned to. At times he was not scheduled to be there, performing actions that have no connection to any law enforcement function. Terry paused and looked directly at Rennick. Rennick's jaw stopped working. What Sergeant Rennick did in that corridor was personal. It was predatory, and it was habitual, and I can prove all three. Terry turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to present the video evidence." Sullivan was on his feet. Objection. The recordings were made without consent. Judge Braxton looked at Terry. "Counsel?" Georgia Code Section 1611-62. Georgia is a one-party consent state. The recordings were made by equipment operated by a party to the incidents, Miss Cartwright, in the context of documenting criminal conduct, specifically sexual battery under Georgia Code 16622.1. The recordings are admissible. Judge Braxton looked at Sullivan. "Counsel, do you have a response to the statutory cite?" Sullivan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your Honor, the equipment was installed as part of a research project, not for the purpose of documenting any individual. The recordings are incidental, and their admission would violate Sergeant Rennick's reasonable expectation of privacy. In a hospital corridor," Judge Braxton said. "Not a question, a correction. A shared workplace corridor, accessible to any employee with a badge, monitored by the hospital's own security camera system." "You're arguing your client had a reasonable expectation of privacy in a surveilled hallway." Sullivan said nothing. "I'm going to allow the video," Judge Braxton said. "Proceed." Terry connected his laptop to the courtroom's display screen. The screen was mounted on the wall to the left of the judge's bench, visible to both tables and the gallery. "Your Honor, I'm going to show 3 separate recordings from 3 separate dates.
involving 3 separate women. I want to establish at the outset that these recordings are unedited. Timestamps are embedded. The original files are preserved on an encrypted off-site server, and a forensic copy has been submitted to the court under seal. He pressed play. The first video, the basement corridor, fluorescent light, empty hallway. Then Naomi, entering from the right side of the frame, walking towards server room B. Then Rennick from the stairwell, the approach. The closing of distance, his mouth moving, her body pulling back, his hand on her waist, the pull, his hand on her chest, the squeeze, 2 seconds, her freeze, his release, his adjustment of his belt, his glance up at the main camera, his shift to the left into the blind spot, his walk away. The courtroom was silent. Naomi kept her eyes on the screen. She watched herself freeze on camera, watched her own body go rigid, watched Rennick's hand press against her chest, and she felt something she did not expect. Not rage, not shame. Relief. Because the thing that had lived inside her for weeks, the thing she had described and documented and logged and encrypted, was now outside of her. Visible, undeniable, real. Terry paused the video at the frame where Rennick glanced at the main camera and shifted position. Your Honor, I want to draw attention to this moment. At 12:51 and 43 seconds, Sergeant Rennick looks directly at the hospital's primary security camera. He then moves his body 3 inches to the left, positioning himself in the camera's known blind zone before delivering his final remarks. This is not a man conducting a security procedure. This is a man who has memorized the surveillance architecture of this building and is deliberately positioning himself to avoid detection. This is consciousness of guilt. I need you to understand something. This part right here, this is where it all turned, because up until this moment, the defense had a playbook. They had a script. They had 20 years of qualified immunity case law and a silver-haired attorney who had never lost this argument. But Terry wasn't arguing against the law. He was arguing against the lie. And the lie was on camera, shifting 3 inches to the left. Terry pressed play on the second video. Adrienne Lucas. Same corridor, same choreography. Rennick's hand on her shoulder, sliding down, finding her waist. Adrienne stepping sideways, Rennick following. The hold, the release, the belt adjustment, then the third video. Tamika Reeves. Same corridor, same script, different body, Rennick's hand on her hip, his lean, her freeze, his walk away. 3 women, 3 dates, 1 hallway, 1 man. The same sequence of movements performed with the precision of someone who has practiced until the performance is muscle memory. When the third video ended, Terry turned off the display. Your Honor, the defense has characterized these encounters as routine security procedures. What routine security procedure follows the same physical script, in the same unauthorized location, targeting exclusively female employees during late-night hours when no witnesses are present? This is not security. This is predation. And it is predation performed by a man who is fully aware of what he is doing, where the cameras are, and how to avoid them. He turned to Rennick. Rennick's arms were crossed again. His face had changed. The confidence was still there, the jaw, the posture, but something behind the eyes had shifted, the way a building looks the same from outside even after the foundation has cracked. Regarding the destruction of evidence, Terry continued. On the afternoon of July 14th at 3:17 p.m., while Ms. Cartwright was attending a mandatory meeting called by COO Marcus Webb, someone using a generic IT administrator login accessed the prototype server and deleted all footage files. Ms. Cartwright's access logs, submitted as Exhibit 7, show that she did not perform this deletion. The hospital's own IT access records, obtained through our preservation order, show that the generic credentials were used from a terminal on the 5th floor, the same floor where Mr.
Webb's office is located. The hospital's outside counsel stopped typing on her tablet. She looked up. For the first time, her face showed something other than professional composure.
The deletion of this footage, after Ms. Cartwright had reported Sergeant Rennick's conduct to hospital management, constitutes spoliation of evidence and retaliation against a complainant. The fact that the hospital attempted to destroy the very evidence that would have confirmed its own employee's complaint tells this court everything it needs to know about Meridian General's commitment to the safety of its workers. Sullivan stood. Your Honor, there is no evidence connecting Mr. Webb or hospital administration to the deletion of those files. The terminal was on his floor, Terry said. That is circumstantial. The deletion occurred during a meeting he scheduled, a meeting with no documented agenda, a meeting called to discuss fabricated performance concerns about the only employee who had filed a complaint about Sergeant Rennick. That is not circumstantial, Your Honor. That is a timeline. Judge Braxton held up one hand. Both attorneys went quiet. She removed her reading glasses. She looked at Rennick for a long time. Then she looked at Sullivan. Counsel, I've seen the video. 3 recordings, 3 separate victims, consistent pattern of behavior, in an area outside the defendant's assigned duties. Your client looked directly at a security camera and repositioned himself to avoid it. That is not the behavior of a man performing his job. That is the behavior of a man who knows what he is doing is wrong and is taking steps to conceal it. She put her reading glasses back on. The motion to dismiss on qualified immunity grounds is denied. Sergeant Rennick's actions, as depicted in the video evidence, were personal in nature, outside the scope of his contracted duties, and directed at specific individuals for purposes unrelated to law enforcement. Qualified immunity does not apply. The sound in the courtroom was not gasps, it was not murmurs. It was the sound of 4 people exhaling at the same time. Naomi. Denise, sitting in the gallery behind the plaintiff's table, reading glasses on top of her head, hands gripping the bench in front of her. Adrienne sitting next to Denise, her composition notebook in her lap. Tamika, on Adrienne's other side, a woman so still she could have been carved from stone, now blinking rapidly, her chest rising and falling with the kind of breathing that comes after you've been holding it for months. Rennick turned to Sullivan. He said something. Sullivan shook his head once. Rennick said something again louder, and Naomi heard 2 words. You said? Sullivan put his hand on Rennick's arm. Rennick pulled away, not violently, instinctively. The way a man pulls away when he realizes the ground beneath him is no longer solid. Behind him, in the second row, Patrice Rennick stood up. She picked up her purse. She did not look at her husband. She walked to the end of the row, her heels clicking on the courtroom floor, each step measured and deliberate. The walk of a woman who had known this day was coming and had already packed her bags. She pushed through the double doors and they swung shut behind her, with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Rennick watched her go. His face did something Naomi had never seen it do. The mask, the smile, the confidence, the performance, all of it fell away in one moment, and underneath was something small and stunned and entirely alone. The hospital's outside counsel was already typing on her phone. Naomi did not know it yet, but within the hour, that attorney would recommend to Meridian General's board of directors that the hospital settle the negligence and retaliation claims before trial. Within 2 hours, a reporter from WSB-TV named Candace Monroe, who had received a tip from a source Terry had cultivated for weeks, would file a records request for the hearing transcript and the video exhibits. By evening, the story would be on the 6 o'clock news. By morning, it would be everywhere. But that was later. Right now, in this courtroom, in this moment, Naomi Cartwright was sitting at a table in a navy blue blazer with her hands still laced together in her lap, and she was looking at the blank display screen where, minutes ago, the worst moment of her life had been played for strangers to see. She had given up her privacy, her dignity, her most vulnerable moment, and offered it as evidence. She had done this so that the system that had swallowed her mother's records, and Keisha's complaint, and Carmen's safety, and Denise's silence could not swallow her too. Terry put his hand on the table next to hers, not touching her, just near, close enough to mean something. Naomi, he said quietly. She looked at him. It held. She nodded. She didn't trust her voice yet. Her hands were still pressed together, knuckles white, holding everything in place, the way she had held everything in place since the night in the basement. She wasn't ready to let go. Not here. Not in front of these people. She would let go later, in her car, or in her kitchen, or in the dark of her daughter's room, listening to Zuri breathe. But not here. She had one more thing to do first. She stood up, she turned to the gallery. Denise was looking at her with eyes that were full and steady. Adrienne had her composition notebook pressed against her chest. Tamika was wiping her face with the back of her hand, quick, almost angry, the way you wipe tears when you're not ready to admit they're there. Naomi didn't say anything. She just looked at each of them, one at a time, the way her grandmother used to look at her across the kitchen table. Not proud, not relieved, present. Bearing witness to each woman the way each woman had borne witness for her. Denise nodded once. Slow. The nod of a woman who had waited 2 years for this and had almost stopped believing it was possible. Naomi turned and walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was bright. A water fountain hummed against the far wall. Through the glass doors at the end of the corridor, she could see the Atlanta skyline, hazy with August heat, and the sun sitting high and indifferent above all of it. She kept walking. The story broke on WSB-TV at 6:14 p.m. that evening. Candace Monroe, a reporter who had spent 9 years covering institutional misconduct in Metro Atlanta and who wore her press badge the way other people wear wedding rings, always and without thinking, led the segment from the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Behind her, the building's limestone columns caught the last of the August sun. She had the hearing transcript. She had screenshots from the video exhibits approved for broadcast by the court. She had a quote from Terry Okafor. She had a quote from the Atlanta Police Department's Public Information Office, which said Sergeant Rennick had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. She delivered all of this in 2 minutes and 40 seconds with the calm precision of someone who understood that the facts, laid out in order, were more devastating than any editorial commentary. By 9 p.m., the segment had been shared 14,000 times. By midnight, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had published its own story. By morning, a second reporter, this one from the AJC's investigative team, had filed a public records request for every off-duty security contract between the Atlanta Police Department and private employers in Fulton County for the past 10 years. The dominoes fell in order, each one striking the next with the mechanical certainty of a system that had finally been forced to acknowledge its own weight. Dale Rennick was arrested 9 days after the hearing. The Fulton County District Attorney's Office charged him with 3 counts of sexual battery under Georgia Code 16 Test 622.1 and 1 count of violation of oath of office. He was booked at the Fulton County Jail on a Wednesday afternoon. His bond was set at $75,000. The booking photograph showed a man in a gray t-shirt, unshaven, staring into the camera with an expression that was not defiance and not defeat, but something between the two. The face of a man who had spent 17 years believing the badge made him untouchable and was now learning, in the specific and irreversible language of handcuffs and fingerprint ink, that it did not. His attorney, Garrett Sullivan, issued a statement calling the charges politically motivated and promising a vigorous defense. 2 weeks later, Sullivan withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. Rennick hired a new attorney, a younger man from a smaller firm, who immediately began negotiating a plea. The Atlanta Police Department terminated Rennick's employment on the same day the charges were filed. The termination letter, obtained by WSB-TV through a records request, cited conduct unbecoming an officer and sustained violations of departmental policy regarding off-duty employment. It did not mention the women by name. It did not use the word assault. It used the phrase inappropriate physical contact, which was a kind of language that Naomi recognized, the language of institutions protecting themselves from the vocabulary of what they allowed to happen. But the termination was real. The badge was gone, the uniform was gone, the gun was turned in. The man who had filled doorways and called women sweetheart and operated in blind spots, he had memorized like scripture, was now a civilian, standing in a courthouse hallway in khaki pants. Holding a manila envelope containing the paperwork of his own unmaking, Marcus Webb lasted 11 days longer. The hospital's board of directors convened an emergency session after the hearing transcript became public. The outside counsel, the sharp-featured woman who had been typing on her tablet in the courtroom, presented a liability assessment that used the word exposure 17 times in 4 pages. The board reviewed the timeline Terry had constructed: Webb's refusal to fix the basement camera, twice; Webb's dismissal of Naomi's verbal complaint; the performance review with fabricated concerns; the deletion of footage from a terminal on his floor during a meeting he had called. Each item alone was defensible. Together, they formed a shape that no board of directors wanted to explain to a jury. Webb was asked to resign. He did. He cleaned out his office on a Saturday when the administrative floor was empty. He took his coffee mug, the one he never seemed to drink from, and a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with the governor at a hospital fundraiser. He did not take the laptop. The laptop had been seized by the hospital's legal team as part of the preservation order. Naomi heard about Webb's departure from Denise, who heard it from a charge nurse on the day shift, who heard it from an administrative assistant who had watched Webb carry his box to the elevator without making eye contact with anyone. The information traveled through the hospital, the way information always traveled, not through official channels but through the network of women who had been watching and waiting and keeping their own receipts. The settlement came in October. Meridian General Hospital agreed to a confidential financial settlement with Naomi, Denise, Adrienne, and Tamika. The specific number was sealed by the court, but Terry told Naomi it was enough to pay off her student loans, fund a college account for Zuri, and leave enough left over that she would never again have to calculate whether she could afford to tell the truth. More important to Naomi than the money were the structural terms. The hospital agreed to terminate all off-duty police security contracts and replace them with a licensed private security firm subject to hospital oversight, mandatory body cameras, and a zero-tolerance harassment policy. The hospital agreed to install a comprehensive building-wide surveillance system with no blind spots, designed and maintained by a newly created position, Director of Security Technology. The hospital agreed to implement an independent reporting mechanism for harassment complaints that bypassed internal HR and went directly to an outside ombudsman. The Director of Security Technology position was offered to Naomi. She accepted. The system she had built in her apartment on her personal cloud for $19 a month became the foundation of the hospital's new surveillance architecture. The prototype cameras, the AI behavioral recognition algorithm, the backup protocols, all of it was integrated into the official infrastructure. The building that had hidden her mother's records and deleted her footage and reviewed her performance for the crime of speaking up was now running on a system she designed. Monitored by tools she created, governed by rules she wrote, the building could no longer hide anything because she had made sure of it. The day the new system went live, Naomi walked the entire hospital. Every floor, every corridor, every stairwell. She checked every camera, every angle, every server connection. When she reached the basement hallway between server room B and the loading dock, she stopped. The old camera was gone. In its place were two new units: wide-angle, high-resolution, full corridor coverage, zero blind spots. She stood in the hallway and looked up at them, and they looked back at her, steady and unblinking, and for a moment the building felt different, not safe exactly. Safety was not a thing she trusted buildings to provide, but visible, every inch of it. Visible. She thought about her mother, Yvonne Cartwright, who had walked into this building 25 years ago and never walked out, and whose records had disappeared into a system that was not built to remember her. Naomi could not go back and fix that. She could not recover the lost files, or rewrite the medical charts, or undo the hours when her mother bled and no one acted fast enough. But she could make sure that from this day forward, this building would remember everything. Every hallway, every encounter, every moment when someone needed help and someone else chose to look away. The building would see it, and the building would keep it. Denise Holloway returned to her night shift the week after the settlement was finalized. She had considered retiring early. Ray's treatment was going well. The new immunotherapy protocol was working better than anyone expected, and with her share of the settlement, the $800 a month was no longer a weight she carried alone. But Denise had 11 more years of nursing in her, she said, and she was not going to let Dale Rennick be the reason she left a job she loved. She came back on a Tuesday night. She wore her reading glasses on top of her head. She called everyone baby and sugar. The first time she walked past the basement hallway, she paused, looked at the new cameras, adjusted her glasses. Kept walking. Adrienne Lucas stayed at Meridian General for 3 more months. Then she applied to a nursing program at Georgia State. She was accepted. Her mother and Macon paid off the loan the same week Adrienne enrolled, using money Adrienne had wired her from the settlement. On Adrienne's last day at the hospital, she left her composition notebook, the one with 7 months of handwritten records, on Naomi's desk. Inside the front cover, she had written, "For the next woman who needs receipts, Tamika Reeves transferred to a hospital in Savannah. She did not give a reason. Some wounds close better in new air." 3 months after the story aired on WSB-TV, a woman named Keisha Bryant sent Naomi an email. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was 4 sentences. "I saw the news. I left Meridian 2 years ago because nobody believed me. Thank you for being the person I couldn't be. I hope you know what you did." Naomi read the email at her desk in the basement. She read it twice. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the blue glow of the server lights and let herself feel it, the weight of a woman she had never met, reaching across 2 years of silence to say, "You were heard." Carmen Vega did not send an email. But she stopped parking on the street. She moved her car back to the parking structure where the new security cameras covered every level and every stairwell. And she walked to the hospital entrance without her keys between her fingers for the first time in 18 months. The hearing before Judge Braxton had one more consequence that played out quietly, away from the headlines. The judge's ruling denying qualified immunity was published in the Fulton County Legal Record and picked up by a legal blog that covered police accountability cases in the Southeast. A law professor at Emory University cited it in an article about the limits of immunity for off-duty officers. A state representative from DeKalb County referenced the case in a committee hearing on police oversight reform. The ripple moved outward the way ripples do, getting wider and softer but never quite disappearing. Rennick pleaded guilty to 2 counts of sexual battery in January. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory registration on the sex offender registry. He was prohibited from working in any security or law enforcement capacity for the rest of his life. At the sentencing hearing, he read a statement his attorney had written for him. He used the phrase, "I take full responsibility," twice. He did not apologize to any of the women by name. Patrice Rennick filed for divorce the same month. The filing was a matter of public record. The reason cited was irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. No other details were provided, and none were needed. If you've been in that room, if you've stood in that hallway, if you've felt a hand land where it wasn't invited and heard a voice tell you to relax, if you've watched the system shrug and the badge win and the silence spread like something poured on a floor, then you know what this story cost and you know what it's worth. If this found you tonight, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. We're Chantal Name, and we tell the stories the system tried to bury. We're current number strong, pushing for subscriber goal, and every single one of you makes this louder. I pray this story finds the person who needs it tonight. On a Sunday evening in late October, Naomi Cartwright stood in her kitchen and cooked oxtail stew. The Dutch oven was on the burner, the same pot. The crack in the lid was still there, that thin line from handle to rim, and it would always be there. Naomi had stopped seeing it as damage a long time ago. It was just part of the pot, part of the history, part of what made it hold heat the way it did. Steady and deep, the kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself but fills the room without asking. The apartment smelled like thyme and allspice and Scotch bonnet pepper. The browning sauce from the West Indian grocery on Buford Highway sat on the counter next to the stove. From the living room, a Bluetooth speaker played something low and warm. Not Lauryn Hill Tonight. Mahalia Jackson, How I Got Over. Naomi didn't remember choosing it. Maybe the shuffle had chosen it for her. Either way, it fit. Zuri was at the kitchen table, purple crayon in her right hand, a new drawing spread out in front of her. She had gotten better since the summer. The horses looked like horses now. This one had a rider. "Mama, who's this?" Zuri held up the drawing. Naomi looked. The rider had brown skin and big hair and was sitting very straight on the horse's back. "Who is it?" "It's you," Zuri said. "You're on a horse because horses are brave." Naomi took the drawing. She held it for a moment, looking at it the way you look at something a child gives you that accidentally says everything you needed to hear. "Can I put this on the fridge? Next to Grandma Estelle? Right next to her?
Naomi taped the drawing to the refrigerator with a fresh piece of masking tape.
Right beside the photograph of Estelle in her church hat. 2 women on a refrigerator door in a small kitchen in South Atlanta. One young and fierce in a wide-brimmed hat. One drawn in purple crayon, sitting on a horse because horses are brave. She went back to the stove, stirred the stew.
The oxtails were almost done. The meat pulling away from the bone, the broth thick and dark with 4 hours of patience. She put the lid on, crack and all, and turned the heat down 1 notch.
The doorbell rang. Naomi opened it. Denise Holloway stood in the hallway holding a foil-covered pan. "Cornbread," Denise said. "Ray's recipe. He says it's medicinal. How's he doing?" "Good days and bad days, sugar. Today's a good day. He made me promise to bring this over before it got cold." Behind Denise, coming up the stairs with a bottle of something in a brown paper bag, was Terry. His father's notebook was in his jacket pocket, the leather corner sticking out the way it always did. "I brought cider," he said, "the fancy kind."
From the farmer's market? Apple cider with oxtail stew, Denise said, raising an eyebrow. It's artisanal. That's a word for overpriced. They came inside.
Denise set the cornbread on the counter and immediately began inspecting the stew, lifting the lid, leaning in, closing her eyes. "You got Estelle's hand, girl?" she said quietly. This pot remembers Terry poured cider into 3 mismatched glasses and a plastic cup with a cartoon character on it for Zuri. They sat at the kitchen table, the 4 of them in a kitchen that was too small for 4 people, but had never felt crowded when the right people were in it. Zuri showed Terry her drawing. Terry studied it with the same intensity he brought to legal briefs. "That's a strong horse," he said. "It's Mama," Zuri said. "I know," Terry said. "I can tell. They ate. The stew was right. The cornbread was still warm. Mahalia Jackson sang from the living room about getting over, about mountains and valleys, and the long road through. The kitchen window was open. October in Atlanta. The first cool air in months. The kind of evening that forgives you for the summer you just survived." Naomi looked at the table. Denise was breaking cornbread into her stew the way Southern women have done for longer than anyone alive can remember. Terry was writing something in his notebook with one hand and eating with the other, the pen leaving ink smudges on his thumb. Zuri was arranging her crayons by color on the placemat, building a spectrum from red to violet with the seriousness of an engineer. Nobody was talking. The silence was not empty. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who have been through something together and have arrived on the other side without needing to explain what the other side looks like. Naomi picked up the lid of the Dutch oven to serve herself another spoonful. The crack caught the light from the stove, a thin line, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. She ran her thumb along it, warm from the heat, smooth from the years. The pot was old, the pot was cracked, the pot was still on the fire. Through the kitchen window, the sky over South Atlanta had gone dark, and the first stars of October were out, small and patient and very far away. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's television murmured through the wall. Somewhere on Cascade Road, Pearl's place was closing for the night, the neon sign clicking off 1 letter at a time. Somewhere at Meridian General, a new set of cameras watched every hallway, every corridor, every corner where the old system used to look away. The building was remembering now, all of it, everything. And in a small kitchen with a cracked pot and a purple crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator, Naomi Cartwright was smiling.